You're listening to Beans on Borscht, a podcast where two seemingly different cultures find common ground in bitching about the weather. So welcome back to episode 2 of Beans on Borscht. I'm Hanna.
And I'm Matt.
And this week, we're doing another uplifting and life-affirming chat for you. We'll be talking about power cuts or blackouts, the deliberate and ongoing destruction of civilian power infrastructure in Ukraine. And in this episode, we'll explore what the blackouts are, why they're happening, how people are reacting, how people are coping and dealing with them, what it means to live in the city, not just in Kyiv, but we'll kind of focus specifically on Kyiv because I live here, where power is never guaranteed, and from generators and elevators to the psychological toll of engineered darkness.
Yeah, so welcome, Hanna. It's good to see you again. In our last episode, we talked about drones, how they are used, what they target, what it meant to live under the constant presence of something you can hear before it strikes. This episode picks up where that one leaves off. Because drones don't just carry weapons, they carry consequences. And one of the most immediate results of those attacks is what happens after the explosions stop. The lights go out, the water stops flowing, and entire cities are pushed into darkness. So before we talk about what daily life looks like under blackout conditions, let's just start with the basics, if that's okay. What is a blackout in this context? When did they begin for you? And how are they different from the other kinds of power cuts that might affect us? It's kind of an important question to discuss because UK civilians may conflate what we're talking about today with what happened during World War II, for example, where during the Blitz, civilians were legally required to extinguish or heavily shield all light at night to prevent German bombers from using them as navigational aids. So this sort of included things like blackout curtains, no street lights covering vehicle headlights, penalties for leaks. So can you explain a little bit about what they are, when they occur, and where they impact?
Yeah, so and I think the name, to start with the name or the definition of the blackout is important because we see different types of names being used in the media. I think I've mostly seen medias use the word power cut, which is, I think, more accurate because we started calling them blackouts when they first happened, which was in November 2022, the first year of the full-scale invasion. Russian forces started targeting the energy infrastructure, like the energy sector in Ukraine in September. Why autumn and winter? Because it's getting colder and a lot of people rely on electricity to provide the heating because they target mostly civilian packed cities, big cities like Kyiv, Odesa, Kharkiv, Dnipro, where people mostly live in apartment complex, and those apartment complexes are new, that we have a lot of them, and they are all powered by electricity. So when you don't have electricity in your flat, most likely you also don't have pressure for water, so there is no water in the tap, and you have no heating. So they started early autumn, and then on November 26th of 2022, we had the first massive strike on nuclear plants and substations and other objects of civilian power infrastructure. And we had a first official blackout that lasted more than 48 hours in Kyiv and in other cities in Ukraine. And I think we called it blackout because literally we had no electricity for more than 2 days. Everything went black. Moreover, what's even more dangerous and I would say more impactful is you also lose sometimes cellular reception. So it was literally Kyiv plunged into darkness for more than 2 days. And I think that's where the word blackout originated. Now, and even going forward, starting from autumn of 2022, they have become systematic. What we have now and what we've had in winter of 2023 and winter of 2024, and now we have scheduled systematic power cuts, basically prolonged period of time. Now it's around 15 to 17 hours per day overall in general, where people don't have electricity. And in Ukraine, we call it just simply no light. Not a power cut, it's not blackout, it's not no electricity, it's just no light.
Why are they doing this?
Why they're doing this, I think it's a deliberate attack on civilian infrastructure in particular, because they want to wear civilians down and make them more malleable. I think they want to add the urgency to the negotiations, and they just want civilians to be so fed up, because living with no electricity for a prolonged period of times is very tiring. It's exhausting. This is just another warfare tactic to sway the population to capitulation. People are so worn out. They just gonna say, oh my God, just sign any kind of treaty, sign any kind of paper. We can't live like that anymore.
Do they acknowledge what they're doing? Because, I've looked into many independent news sources, Democracy Now!, Open Democracy, Jacobin. Some of these I'll link in the post below. Do they actually really acknowledge what they're doing, or is this sort of framed in a different way?
Yes and no. The answer to your question, do they acknowledge? Yes, they do acknowledge, and they are very open about it in their news. Like their officials, including Putin, Peskov, Lavrov, they all have commented on the strikes specifically targeted at civilian energy infrastructure, but they frame it very differently. It's very ambiguous, it's controversial as everything they say in their media, but they frame it as part of the demilitarization. And they say that the energy is a legit military target. And again, with cities like Mariupol, cities like Kharkiv, that is just 20 kilometers from the Russian border. Kharkiv is a huge city, and they always say that we don't target civilians, or we don't target civilian objects. We don't target hospitals or kindergartens or residential buildings. So what they say in their news is just that these power plants, substations, all these energy objects, that they are somehow connected to the military. It's a legit military target in their eyes.
I want you to start telling me about what the first one was like for you, because I imagine the first one was, pretty strange, pretty unusual.
It was. And when I was a kid, we had a blackout that lasted for over a month in my hometown. We had a lot of snow, and then the temperature dropped suddenly to below zero, and then we had more snow and more rain, and then the temperature dropped again to minus 15. So the power lines and basically everything was just froze over, and the power lines just broke under the added pressure of the ice. And I was a kid and I loved it, because I didn't go to school. I had to spend a lot of time outside. It was really bizarre in terms of the natural effect of everything being froze over and covered in ice. Now, though, I think that's the difference between a blackout that is caused by some natural disaster or some severe weather conditions and deliberate military attack on your country. Because when the first one happened, all nuclear plants or nuclear reactors in Ukraine that generated electricity in our country, they had stopped as a safeguarding measure because they were targeting them. And the last remaining nuclear plant is still occupied in Zaporizhia by Russian forces. So that was another thing that scared me and many people living in Ukraine, is just the threat of nuclear disaster looming over you. And just wanted to mention that nuclear power powers 50% of electricity in our country. So that's huge.
You talk about the reaction of your government, shutting down nuclear sites seems very sensible in the face of attacks being launched. But what provisions are the government actually providing for the civilians? What support are you guys getting? Is that a difficult question to answer?
No, it's an extremely easy question to answer, because the answer is no, nothing. Government doesn't provide any resilience kits or anything whatsoever. So for example, when the airstrikes started to get worse, the government provided more bomb shelters. So they basically, a few bus stops were restructured into bomb shelters, basically. They added lots of concrete, they added huge doors, they added ventilation and stuff. That's something that in my mind counts as the government provided something for civilians. In terms of blackouts, is every man for himself.
Is that just because the resources are so scarce and like they obviously have to direct what they have to the front line?
I think that's one point, or one reason, but also I just can't imagine and how would you provide resources for people. It's extremely difficult in my opinion because you never know what people already have, what they need. Every household has different needs. And technically, of course, I can imagine them providing at least maybe like one power bank per family, for example. But that's almost sounds pitiful because most people can't afford to buy a power bank at least. Then providing something like a Starlink, for example, to ensure that you always have internet would be so expensive. And a lot of volunteering efforts, a lot of civilian volunteers still to this day, they will collect money to buy a Starlink terminal for the front line because the soldiers rely on them so much.
Yeah, so obviously it's impacting civilians. People get fatigued. People potentially start putting pressure to concede. Do people just, through their own independence, just give up? And if so, like, what does that look like?
People do give up, yes. And the only thing that is within their control is to leave the country. And you know that there's a huge immigration problem when the full-scale war started. Ukraine is a big country. We used to have a population of 30 million people. 20% of Ukraine's population fled the country. 20% is a huge number. And obviously there were peaks of immigration. First one started in March 2022, of course, when the full-scale war started. Then the second peak was autumn 22 and winter 23, and it linked specifically to the blackouts. And from December 22, I think, until like March or maybe later, spring of 2023, almost 2 million people left the country, mostly women and children, because I think for women with small kids, it is extremely difficult to live without electricity.
Well, a lot of the men can't leave, can they?
Yes, most men can't leave because they're supposed to get drafted.
I want you to explore what sort of backup power options you have in Kyiv. What other provisions do civilians sort of like gather, and how does that look in the city?
So it depends on where you live. Again, if you live in a house, you will most likely have a power generator because you can't have them in the apartment, obviously. You can't have them on your balcony, even though a lot of people do that, and that leads to very dramatic, horrific, but funny consequences, leads to a lot of neighboring feuds and just funny memes. Just imagine having a generator on your balcony in the middle of the huge residential complex. It's so loud. It's smelly because of the petrol or diesel that they use to power them. We even have a phrase, the generator alley. It's, for example, I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of coffee shops and restaurants, and every small business basically now relies on a power generator. And they need to store them somewhere. I think they call it pavement generators. So every coffee shop, every restaurant, every hairdressing salon, what have you, every little store, they will have a power generator on the pavement in front of their location. And how do you know that you're in a bad part of the city? People will chain their generators because they're afraid they get stolen. Again, because the market went crazy. There was huge demand, and the prices for generators, power stations, power banks, everything, the prices just soared, skyrocketed. Not everyone can afford them. So imagine you're going down a street that has a lot of coffee shops and small businesses and stuff. You're going through a generator alley because every step you take, you see a power generator. It's super loud. You literally can't hear yourself talk. If you're walking with someone somewhere, You literally pause mid-conversation because there's no point talking. We explored what the blackouts are for me. Have you ever experienced something similar? Power cuts, blackouts?
I mean, that question is like really tricky for me because I'm sat here listening to you talk about it and shuffling in my chair because I'm so uncomfortable that I've got very little that's comparable.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, right. I'm the victim here. Yeah. The closest thing I've had is, I mean, I don't know, like a few months ago, I went to visit my mum and we had really bad weather, frozen power lines, and they snapped. And it's just like you described in your childhood. You know, I had my two daughters there and we had an exciting time because you get candles out. There's no screens. It's different. And it took about 24 hours for it to come back on. So it got a bit cold, but it was fine. Because it was only in Cheshire, our county.
Like Cheshire Cat?
Like Cheshire Cat, yeah. Cheshire Cat or Cheshire Cheese.
Yeah, of course, there's a cheese. There's a cheese for everything.
We are exceptional at a few things. We're exceptional at cheeses. We're exceptional at music. We're exceptional at literature.
Imperialism,
yeah. No, but you know, we were able to just cross the county line and just have dinner in a restaurant. It makes me cringe a little bit even talking about this in the same breath. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. But at least you know what it's like, you know?
Well, not really, because it's a bit like when people dip into poverty. I'm going to, you know, I'll try living on £1 a week for 7 days.
Oh yeah, all those books, you know, like A Year of No Shopping, and you don't need anything. You can use everything that you already have.
You know, it's Common People by Pulp. You call your dad, he can stop it all. So, like, my understanding of poverty is that it's inescapable.
Yeah, you have no choice. You have no choice.
Me talking about it in the same breath, you've unfortunately framed me like...
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, it's fine. So I'm guessing life for electricians in Ukraine at the moment is extremely busy, if not fairly dangerous. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you for that question, because I think it often gets overlooked or not talked enough, especially in the media, because we are looking at we're going into the 5th year of war, full-scale war. So what goes in the media are big things, or big events. A strike on a children's hospital or a massive blackout that lasts for days, for instance. But your question about electricians, civilians, is really important, because these are people that we rely on so much. And they do their work under very risky, very extreme conditions, because what Russians do, they do a double tap attack, I think they're called. So, and they do that with not just when they're targeting our infrastructure. They do that quite frequently when they're targeting civilian objects. So there will be an airstrike, either a missile or a drone will hit something like a residential building or a power plant or substation. And because these locations are predictable locations, they will wait for the repair crews or paramedics, for example, to arrive, and they do a second strike on that same location. And this is very frequently used tactic. And we had suffered many casualties for civilian electricians because they don't have equipment. They arrive without weapons. They arrive without air defense crews to defend them. They don't wear bulletproof vests. They wear helmets, and that's it. They do that because electrician is not a UX designer. I'm so sorry for all the UX designers, but electricians are rare and they're precious. It's like a doctor, right? It's a precious profession right now. And the less we have of them, and they're very needed on the front line as military personnel. So they do get drafted, they do volunteer to join the army, and we don't have that many of them. So if they want to completely cut the power in Ukraine, of course, they cannot target the same location twice and try to kill as many electricians as possible. Because when we don't have enough of them, the repairs stall more time to repair them.
What's the impact been for everyday civilians?
They did become more scheduled and predictable. Kyiv is a very digitalized city. We have an app called Kyiv Цифровий, which basically means digital Kyiv, where you can check everything related to the city. So these apps a schedule of power outages, and they are so what they do when the power goes off, we don't have the entire city plunged into darkness all at once. We have like views or different sectors, for example, so you know which sector you belong to, your building or your address belongs to, and you can check the schedule. And now, this year, the blackouts are more prolonged than they've been even in 2022. But now, people in Kyiv, for example, they don't have electricity for 15 to 17 hours per day, every day. But how it works is, for instance, you go to the app and you check the schedule for the whole week. And you see that today, for example, I will not have power starting from 8 a.m. to like 3 p.m., for example. And then I'm going to have power for 2 hours. You know, there are certain seemingly unsuspecting details of living through systematic power cuts. Like, for instance, when people come to Ukraine, they oftentimes notice scotch tape on the windows. Sign of war, basically. People put scotch tape on the windows, so if there should be an explosion nearby, the windows get shattered, which is the most frequent cause of injuries. The tape is supposed to hold the glass together, so they get fewer glass shards scattered around. With power cuts, one of such unsuspecting details I just thought about is folding chairs in elevators. Because despite the quite bureaucratic nature of systematic power cuts with the schedules and everything, sometimes you can still get caught off guard. And the worst place imaginable, at least for me with my claustrophobia, you can get caught off guard with a power cut is in the elevator. So now if you enter an elevator, not every single one of them, but specifically in buildings that are like high buildings, people put folding chairs there along with fresh water and sometimes even boxes with nappies, wipes, sometimes snacks. So should you get stuck there with a child and need to change them, you at least don't have to worry about that. And for like elderly people, they can wait it out in a slightly more comfortable environmental position by at least having something to sit on in the elevator.
Does it sort of stop you from going places? Like what?
Depends on which floor you live on.
But like, what are the streets like whilst you're driving down them or walking down them?
Because it's winter and it gets dark around 5 p.m. When the power goes out, the streets become dark. There are no street lights, and what is even more annoying, traffic lights working, even though they're supposed to be connected to the generators because they are essential. Imagine driving in winter, and winters in Kyiv are horrific, lots of snow. Imagine driving with no traffic lights and darkness. And as a pedestrian, because I don't drive, even for me, I go out of the subway station, which is like 5 minutes. It's a 5-minute walk to my apartment, and I do have to cross the street a few times. And when it's dark and traffic lights don't work, it becomes like I'm in a video game. I just need to jump and run quickly to catch my chance to cross the street. But people still do go out. Everything works when there is no power. And when you enter any store, it might be dark and the only source of light might be coming from like a flashlight, camping flashlight on the cashier's head. But you can still Apple Pay.
Capital rolls on. What a relief. Well, we're slowly running out of time here. Thanks for walking us through that, Hanna. It's sobering to hear, and really appreciate you sharing what daily life actually looks like. That brings us to the end of this episode on Beans on Borscht. We've talked about darkness, disruption, and deliberate harm, but also about adaptation, solidarity, and the people who keep things running under extraordinary pressure. Blackouts in Ukraine are not an abstract concept or a historical footnote. They're a daily reality that continues to shape millions of lives. If there's one thing to take away, it's that infrastructure is never just infrastructure. Power, water, and light are deeply human concerns. And when they're weaponized, the impact is felt far beyond the switch. So thank you for listening and for staying through yet another heavy topic. And yes, despite our best efforts, we somehow managed to get through this entire episode without really exploring weather. To save that for another time.
We did a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Next episode, we'll be exploring the language of war and how it's used, how it's weaponized, and why it matters just as much as resources, infrastructure, and international support. Until then, take care, and we'll see you in the next episode. That's goodbye from Hannah.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Beans on Borscht. May the noble art of podcasting prevail.